Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name's Jay Clark. I'm the Rothman Family Curator of Prints and Drawings here at the Art Institute, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's lecture, which is being given in conjunction with the exhibition Paula Modersohn-Becker, I Am Me, which is open through January 12th. And as we begin, a reminder I'm always happy to silence your mobile devices. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce you to the speaker for today's program, Jill Lloyd. Jill is an art historian and a curator specializing in 20th century art with particular expertise on German and Austrian art. She's organized many critically acclaimed exhibitions for leading museums and is published widely, including her books German Expressionism, Primitivism and Modernity, The Undiscovered Expressionists, I was going to ask her how to pronounce this and I forgot, so I'm going to butcher it. A Life of Marie-Louise von Modrzewski, close enough. Max Beckmann's Self-Portrait with Horn, and Egon Schiele Women. She has edited far too many books for me to list, but they include Van Gogh and Expressionism, Ferdinand Hodler, Munch and Expressionism, and Ernst Ludwig Kirchner. In 2001, Jill was awarded the Order of Merit by the German government for promoting cultural relations between Germany and the United Kingdom and for bringing German art of the 20th century to a wider audience. Jill is a member of the Board of Trustees of the Neue Gallery in New York, where she curated several important exhibitions, including Vasily Kandinsky, From Blaue Reiter to Bauhaus, Ferdinand Hodler, View to Infinity, Vienna 1900, and Richard Gerstel. Jill and I co-curated the current Modersohn-Becker exhibition, which opened at the Neue Gallery this past June. Earlier this year, she curated the acclaimed exhibition Edvard Munch, Trembling Earth, for the Barberini Museum in Potsdam, Germany. And in case she wasn't busy enough, Jill wrote the introduction to the recently published Modersohn-Becker Rilke Correspondence, which is available in our museum store. Her research on their correspondence will no doubt inform her talk today. It has been such an honor and a pleasure to work with Jill the past 5 years. We've begun our many Zoom calls over the past several years, going on and on about our children first before getting down to business. So it is fitting and wonderful that her son and my daughter are both here in the audience today. Jill is not only a brilliant curator and writer, but she's become a dear and treasured friend. Without further delay, please join me in welcoming Jill to the stage to explore Paula Modersohn-Becker and Rainer Maria Rilke's passionate friendship.
Well, just to say, first of all, the sentiments are very mutual. And I was thrilled to see the exhibition here. We had it in New York first, where I worked, and it was just we had a wonderful time putting the exhibition together, but also to see how interesting it is for us curators to see how different the same exhibition can look in two different museums, and it looks wonderful here. I hope many of you will have seen it already. Okay, I'm going to talk today about Paula Modersohn-Becker and the poet Rainer Maria Rilke. Now, for those of you that have been in the exhibition, you'll see that there are many self-portraits by Paula Modersohn-Becker on display at the moment in the museum. And in a way, her whole work can be seen almost like a kind of journey of self-discovery. There is just one small portrait of Rainer Maria Rilke, which you're looking at here on your left, with the self-portrait looking left with hand on chin, 1906 on the right, and her portrait of the poet on 1906 on the left. Just this one small self-portrait is on display because that's the only one she painted of her poet friend. You'll see that his mouth is open to speak and his eyes are clouded, both observant and strangely withdrawn and dreamy. It's likely that the poet Rainer Maria Rilke's name is better known to you than the artist Paula Modersohn-Becker. His poetry is as important in the German-speaking world as a poet like T.S. Eliot is in America, and he has long since enjoyed international fame. Paula Modersohn-Becker, although renowned in her native Germany and the first woman artist ever to have a museum dedicated to her work, is only now gaining the international reputation she deserves. Both poet and artist were groundbreaking creative spirits who explored, I think, what it felt like to be a human being at the dawn of the modern period. But they belong to exactly the same generation. Rilke was born in December 1875, and Paula Modersohn-Becker, or Paula Becker, as she was born, Modersohn-Becker is her married name, Paula Becker was born in February 1876. And the friendship that the two developed eventually, which I'll come to in a minute, was based on personal chemistry and on the intensity with which they engaged in each other's artistic worlds. Rilke was passionate about the visual arts. He wrote books, among others, on the French sculptor Auguste Rodin, and in 1907, letters to his wife, the sculptress Clara Westoff, about Cezanne, are, in my mind, amongst the best art criticism ever written. In her turn, Modersohn-Becker was an avid reader, and her literary talent shines through in her clearly expressed, heartfelt letters to her husband, her friends, and her family, which brought her fame before her paintings. She was known through her letters first. Her correspondence with Rilke, which we've just translated into English for the first time, and Jay mentioned is available in the bookshop here, spans 7 years, opening a window onto their passionate, if volatile, friendship. The threads of these two lives were drawn together by the village called Worpswede in North Germany, which was both a village and an artist's colony, set in a flat, windswept landscape of peat bogs, heather, and silver birch forests lying to the north of Bremen. It's in very far northern Germany. The local inhabitants there scraped a difficult living as peat cutters, small farmers, and day laborers. The place was discovered by artists searching for what they thought of as an authentic alternative to urban modernity and new horizons in art. In 1889, the artist Otto Modersohn, who was to marry Paula 10 years later, wrote in his journal, "Away with academies, down with professors and teachers. Nature will be our teacher." In 1895, Paula Becker was very enthusiastic about an exhibition of Worpswede artists, including her future husband, she saw at the Bremen Kunsthalle. At the time, she was studying in Berlin at the Society of Women Artists, and in the summer of 1897, she spent 2 weeks in Worpswede during her summer vacation, describing the place as a wonderland, a land of the gods. You can see this rather bleak, in a way, rainy landscape was transformed in the imagination of the artists into a kind of paradise. In early September 1898, Paula Becker returned to Worpswede to study with the artist Fritz Mackensen, alongside other women artists, including Clara Westoff, who was to marry Rilke. As the state academies at the time were barred to women, private studios like this gave them an opportunity to develop their skills. Worpswede was a melting pot of various artistic styles. And I'm showing you here on your left a painting by Fritz Mackensen, Paula Becker's teacher, called Nursing Child of 1892. And on the other side, Heinrich Vogeler, Spring, 1897. Both of these are very, very big paintings. The one of the nursing mother, the nursing child, is 180 by 140 centimeters, so a vast painting, and the other one is more or less the same size. Mackensen was characterized by his heroic realism, in other words, paintings that have a basis in reality, but he blows them up onto a kind of heroic scale. Heinrich Vogeler was known for his romantic medievalism, comparable to British pre-Raphaelite artists. And you see here the young girl who was actually his wife wandering through the silver birch forests, dressed in a kind of romantic medieval costume. Importantly, Paula Becker was grounded in the former artistic trend and Rilke in the latter. The remarkable realist foundations to Modersohn-Becker's work are evident in her early drawings, of which Jay has assembled a beautiful collection in the museum now. I'm showing you Woman in Profile Turned Right on your left, which belongs to the Chicago Art Institute and is one of the very best drawings in the exhibition. The middle drawing, Standing Nude Girl Turned Left with Crossed Arms, 1898-9, and on the right, Seated Girl in Profile to the left. And you'll see that all of them have this extraordinarily close, realistic study of the model, but it's not a heroic realism like Mackensen's. It's a kind of empathetic realism. You feel that she's really, she doesn't glorify or generalize the local population. Rather, she presents them in all their dignified individuality and vulnerability. Heinrich Vogeler and Rilke, meanwhile, shared their penchant for medieval romanticism. Rilke's early verse, short stories and plays, show the influence of German folk songs and are often compared to a poet like Heinrich Heine, who is known for these romantic lyrical poems. Rilke, who began to publish poetry as a very young man in the early 1890s, came to Worpswede through Heinrich Vogeler, who he met in Italy in 1897, and the bond between the two was close. Vogeler illustrated Rilke's poetry. In 1899, he made decorative Jugendstil vignettes and decorations for the poems in the collection called Mir zu Feier, or In My Honor, and then in 1899 for Stories of God, and 1902 the Book of Images, Das Buch der Bilder, which you can see illustrated to the, that one is on the right-hand side of the screen. Vogeler invited Rilke to join him for Christmas in Bremen in 1898, and together they visited the Jugendstil mansion called Barkenhof that Vogeler was constructing on the edge of Worpswede village. This is a photograph of it today. You can still visit it today. It's a museum, very beautifully done, and it's a kind of total work of art. Every detail is designed by Vogeler himself. This is a painting called Summer Evening, the Concert, 1903 to 1905, set in this very beautiful manicured garden and terrace in front of the Barkenhof villa. Rilke returned to Worpswede in August 1900. He was invited by Vogler to join the group of artists that met for musical evenings and poetry readings in the beautiful Barkenhof Villa. Rilke was one of the guest speakers, welcomed by the Worpswede group, who called themselves the family. And you can see them sitting here together. I'll just point a few of them out to you because Paula is here. Paula is sitting, sorry if I got this. Yeah, always manage to do that. Paula is sitting here. This is Otto Modersohn, who she married. This is Clara Westoff. This is Vogler's wife, Martha, and Vogler and his brother and brother-in-law are playing the musical instruments on the other side of the painting. And here you'll see there's a strange empty space that we'll come back to in a minute. The core members of this family, as they called themselves, were three couples, all of whom married in the spring of 1901. First, Vogler himself and Martha Schröder, a young village girl considered by many an inappropriate match for the artist. Vogler oversaw her education, and he represented her in paintings as a medieval damsel and himself as a courtly knight. In fact, this was a rather independent and a very interesting woman who went on in later life to be a very talented weaver and set up a workshop of her own after they separated, because the marriage didn't last, in the Worpswede village. You can see here, I'm sorry, I should have said to you, on one side the photograph and in the other a work actually of 1912 called Expectation, where you can see the model is very clearly Martha. The second couple was Paula Becker and Otto Modersohn, whose first wife, Helena, died in 1900. Modersohn, even before his wife died, as she was very ill at the time, was already attracted to Paula, and Helena died actually while he was visiting Paula in Paris in 1900. Their relationship was kept secret out of a sense of propriety, it being too soon after Helena's death for an open engagement. Helena had left behind a small child, Elspeth, who was to become Paula Modersohn-Becker's stepdaughter. You see her here in the photograph on your right, sitting in the foreground. And this is actually a photograph taken in the Barkenhof Villa's gardens. Now, marriage to Modersohn, there is no doubt that there wasn't a genuine affection between the two of them at the beginning of their marriage. There certainly was, which remained very steadfast on Modersohn's side. But for Paula, alongside the affection and love she felt for Otto at the beginning, there was also the opportunity he gave her for financial independence. He was a successful artist. I mean, now the irony is, of course, that she is a far more remembered name than her husband's. But at the time, he was a very popular, successful artist, and marrying him allowed her to go on working without being financially dependent on her father, who really couldn't afford to keep supporting his daughter indefinitely. As she was to learn, marriage came with constrictions of its own, but at the time she felt very relieved to be able to support her, or to be supported by Otto. Oh, sorry. The third couple is Rilke and Clara Westoff. And I'm showing you a photograph from 1903, a rather formal photograph of them, which was made in Rome. And on the other side, a photograph of the two of them together in 1906. I'm showing you later photographs. Remember, the period I'm talking about is 1900. It's during Rilke's the visit he made to Worpswede. I'm showing you later photographs because at the time, in the summer of 1900, it was not at all clear whether Rilke was courting Paula Becker or Clara Westoff, or perhaps both. And I think that blank seat in the Vogler painting is a kind of allusion to this, because where does he put Rilke? Does he put him next to Clara? Does he put him next to Paula? So he just leaves the seat empty. This is a photo of Paula Becker, as she was at the time, and Clara Westoff in Paula's studio in Worpswede a year or two before they both married. Rilke met Paula Becker at the first of their Sunday gatherings on September the 2nd, when he read a medieval ballad about a girl dying for love, and she described him in her journal. She wrote, "A refined lyrical talent, gentle and sensitive, with small, touching hands. He read his poems to us, tender and full of presentiment. He is sweet and pale." And Otto Modersohn also remarked on Rilke's oratorial talents, which he obviously put to good use in his wooing of the two girls at the same time, recording that the poet gave these readings an air of especially solemn consecration. He often read from his works with his wonderfully soft, vibrating voice. No one could escape the deep, gripping effect. It was as if one was entranced by the evocative power that radiated from him. By the following Sunday, Rilke's diary records that he was actually more impressed by Clara's beauty than Paula's. Clara was a striking woman, a very beautiful, striking woman, 6 feet tall, with striking features, full of energy. Paula was a small and petite woman, so they must have formed quite a contrast. But during this period where they both wore white dresses, Rilke kind of idealized them as kind of virginal, beautiful young women that he could romanticize in his poetry. Like Paula, Clara had come to Worpswede to study with Mackensen, and the two girls became fast friends. Rilke was attracted, as I've said, to both, but initially he seems to have enjoyed a more passionate exchange of ideas with Paula. They, I quote, spoke of Tolstoy. This he recorded in his journal. They spoke of death, of beauty, of the capacity to die and the wish to die, of eternity, and why we feel related to eternity. So serious, artistic conversations that they had at the time. Paula Becker and Clara were just back from their first visit to Paris. And I'm showing you here on your left, Paula's self-portrait with view from the artist's studio, 1900, an early self-portrait, and drawings from her Paris sketchbooks made over the course of the 3 stays she made in the art capital, 1900, 1903, 1905, and the last stay, which was 1906 to 1907. And these periods that she spent in Paris became closely associated in her mind with Rilke, who settled in Paris for several extended periods, sometimes with Clara, sometimes alone. While Rilke belonged to the wider world and represented broadening horizons for Paula, her husband Otto increasingly came to represent Worpswede and confinement. Her early encounters with modern French art made her see how conventional German art was in comparison. She considered Paris somewhere she could learn and grow, attending art classes at the private academies which were open to women, visiting galleries, museums, and in 1900, the World Exhibition. And you can see from these pages in her sketchbook, she sketches what's going on in the streets. She also sketches monuments and paintings that she sees in the Louvre and other art museums in Paris. And almost immediately, when she returns to Worpswede in that summer when she met Rilke, she began to experiment with radical compositions and color that challenged the traditional foundations of Worpswede art. I'm showing you here a painting by Otto Modersohn on your left, which is called Autumn on the Moor, 1895, and two landscapes which are in the exhibition here, more by Paula Modersohn-Becker, Paula Becker at the time, sorry, Moor Canal and birch trunks in front of a red house wall, 1900 and 1901. And you can see how she has this very original way of not looking at the landscape as a kind of panorama objectively, but going right in, close up on details of the landscape and creating these very unconventional compositions so that the waterway is like a slash across the landscape, reflecting the sky. And this tendency she has to kind of make the world around her seem intimate and subjective rather than kind of out there as an objective phenomenon is very characteristic of her art more generally. But Rilke, although he was there in the summer of 1901 when she was painting this kind of work, knew nothing of her work at the time. He visited Clara's studio and spoke with her about her work and their mutual admiration for Auguste Rodin. And Clara Westoff, I'm showing you two works to see, you can see what she did as an artist. Sitting Boy, 1900, which was a work that Rilke particularly liked by his wife, and Clara Westoff's portrait of Paula Becker, 1899, a portrait she made of her friend Paula. And Clara is a bit of a forgotten artist, whereas now Paula Modersohn-Becker is beginning to enjoy real international fame and has been known for many years, since really the 1960s when feminist artists discovered her. Clara has not really had the same kind of comeback. Perhaps she's not quite as an original an artist as Paula is, but it's you have to actually kind of search to find examples of her work. So I wanted to be able to show you some. And so while Clara definitely showed Rilke what she was doing, Paula Becker, Rilke later said, showed him nothing. On October the 5th, 1900, Rilke left Worpswede without saying goodbye and headed to Berlin. And there is speculation that the suddenness of his departure may relate to his discovery and disappointment that Paula Becker was secretly engaged to Otto Modersohn. He just left. He was planning to stay, but he didn't. He left. This is photographs of them, a slightly younger Paula and Rilke around 1900. When Rilke left, he committed a small sketchbook of his poems to Becker's care. This marks the beginning of their correspondence. Rilke wrote that as there had not been an opportunity to say goodbye, they were, I quote, actually still together, as often as we meet somewhere in related thoughts. Throughout the autumn of 1900, they maintained a lively exchange of letters, with Rilke sending Becker books by authors he admired and copies of his own poems. One of these, The Singer Sings Before a Child of Princes, dedicated to the pale child who enriches the singer with your fate, was inspired by Modersohn-Becker, whose hair Rilke described as being spun from Florentine gold. She had beautiful auburn brown hair. The following winter, Becker and Rilke met frequently in Berlin, where the poet established a temporary home and the artist attended cookery classes in preparation for her marriage to Modersohn. Their engagement now having been officially announced, and this was at the insistence of her father, who a little later that year wrote to her, or reminded her in a letter, that her duty in future would be, I quote, to merge with your future husband, to dedicate yourself completely to his ways and wishes, to have his welfare constantly in sight, and not let yourself be guided by selfish thoughts. And this was the expectation of a woman who was getting married in 1900. Paula Becker's father was not a small-spirited man, a conservative man. He was a liberal man, and he encouraged his daughters to stand on their own 2 feet. He gave them, he insisted they took a teacher training course, because that was one of the few ways, that women had a chance of making their own living at the time. He was a liberal man, but that's how he thought. The minute she was going to get married, she had to give up her own ambitions and dedicate herself to her husband. So during this period, Rilke was a kind of alternative to this world that was, in a way, becoming narrower around her, because they went to art exhibitions together, they went to lectures together. He went on stimulating Paula's intellectual and creative world. But there was a sudden change of mood in February 1901 when Rilke and Clara Westoff announced their plan to marry. I'm showing you a photo of Rilke and Clara in Westerwede, near Worpswede, on your left, and another photo of them later on in 1910 on the other side. All through this period, Rilke had maintained a parallel, intimate correspondence with Westoff, which Paula Becker apparently knew little about. She was taken by surprise and felt excluded from their intimacy, a sentiment that was doubtlessly reinforced by the birth of Rilke's daughter Ruth, of the Rilke and Clara's daughter Ruth, in the first year of their marriage, very shortly after they were married. I'm showing you here Clara Westoff's bust of Paula Modersohn, of Paula Becker, 1899, this time in a bronze, later version, a cast. And on the other side, Paula's portrait of the sculptor Clara Rilke Westoff, 1905, which is in the exhibition. A very beautiful portrait. Rilke considered that Modersohn-Becker, as she was now married in the spring of 1901, during the same period that he married Clara, failed to appreciate the new demands on Clara and the financial difficulties that were weighing on the couple, while the artist felt that she had lost her closest female friend. This came as a heavy blow, for Westoff was her confidant when it came to matters of art, and remained, I quote, "of all my friends, the one I care about most." Although Modersohn-Becker showed no real interest in the collective women's movement, she strongly believed in the rights and equality of individual women. She accused Westoff of having sacrificed her core identity to her marriage, and this is very key because it was something she was determined not to do. She wrote to Clara at this point, "You have stripped off a lot of your old self and put it down as a coat for your king to walk on." This disagreement about the role that friends played in each other's lives brought about one of the fundamental differences between the artist and the poet to light. Whereas friendship for Modersohn-Becker involved passionate attachment, Rilke regarded it as a refined art of leaving one another alone. Friends don't protect us against loneliness, Rilke had pondered. They only limit our solitude. He charged Modersohn-Becker with possessiveness and adopted a preaching tone. "I consider the highest task in the relationship between human beings to be this, that one guards the solitude of the other." Still missing Clara later that year, Modersohn-Becker reconsidered the poet's advice. Rilke once wrote to me that it is the duty of husband and wife to keep watch over each other's solitude. But isn't a solitude that someone has to keep watch over merely a superficial solitude? Isn't true solitude completely open and unguarded? But they had a serious falling out at this time, really about the role that Clara was to play in each other's lives. Rilke initiated, however, a reconciliation when he learnt that Modersohn-Becker was planning her second visit to Paris in the winter of 1903. Together, they attended a sale of Japanese art at the Hotel Drouot, and she spent many evenings in the company of the Rilke-Westoff couple. However, the artist found her erstwhile friends glum, work-obsessed, and self-centered. She considered that Rilke had imposed his fanatical work ethic on his wife and suppressed her former joie de vivre. And you can see that Clara does not look altogether happy in the portrait that Paula made of her. Once again, this points towards a fundamental difference in their respective worldviews. While Paula embraced life, she loved to skate, to dance, to stride bareheaded through the stormy Worpswede landscape and drink in the sights and sounds of Paris. The poet believed that great art necessitated sacrifice and a relinquishment of life's joys and temptations. And the poor man often felt himself divided between these opposing demands. The situation was not improved by the publication in 1903 of the poet's monograph on the Worpswede artist's colony, which I'm showing you in the middle slide here. Rilke failed in this monograph, although in his defense it was a commissioned book, and to some extent he was told what he should write about, but he failed to mention any of the women artists affiliated with the group. And Modersohn-Becker condemned this book as, I quote, a nut that was hollow at its core. In spite of all its talk and beautiful sentences. In fact, she was producing the most radical, unromantic, uncompromising work of any artist in the colony. I'm showing you on the right-hand side, Girl in a Red Dress at a Birch Tree Trunk, 1905, so around this time. And you can see how incredibly raw and abstracted the painting is in relationship to this rather beautiful romantic scene by her husband. Modersohn saw this tendency in Paula as deliberate contrariness. He wrote, Paula hates the conventional. Hands like spoons, noses like bulbs, mouths like wounds, expressions like cretins. And Rilke remained totally unaware of this innovatory painting style. There was also, I have to say, a degree of chauvinism in his attitude to Paula at the time. When Rilke wrote a letter of introduction to Auguste Rodin for Modersohn-Becker in March 1903, he described her as the wife of a very distinguished painter, ignoring her own identity as an artist completely. And in a letter, Paula was obviously very put out by all this, because in a letter to her husband at this juncture, she describes Rilke very disparagingly as gradually diminishing to a rather tiny flame, which wants to brighten its light through association with the radiance of the great spirits of Europe. The next turning point in this volatile friendship came when Rilke visited Worpswede in 1905 for the Christmas holidays. On this occasion, the poet was struck for the first time by Modersohn-Becker's artistic achievement, and he was completely taken aback by the originality of the paintings he saw in her studio. Rilke wrote soon afterwards, and this is the kind of work that he would have seen. These are paintings of 1905. I'm showing you Worpswede I'm showing you girl blowing a flute in the birch forest on your left and old woman from the poorhouse sitting in the garden on your right. And Rilke, when he saw this kind of work, I don't know if he actually saw these two works, but this period of work in her studio, the most remarkable thing was to find Modersohn's wife developing her painting in a way all her own, recklessly and straightforwardly painting things that are very Worpswede-ish, and yet that no one before her has ever been able to see and paint. And on this very idiosyncratic path, strangely close to Van Gogh and his artistic direction. Rilke's belief in Modersohn-Becker as an artist established a new basis of trust at a time when the artist certainly needed trusted friends. For she was preparing to break free from her marriage and the narrow confines of Worpswede, convinced the only way to fulfill her potential, to become herself, was to move to Paris and devote herself entirely to her art. The Rilke-Westoff couple were among the very few people who supported her decision. And a few days before her departure, she wrote to Rilke, thanking him for buying a small painting as a tangible gesture of support. Rilke bought this little painting, interesting, very sweet, small, difficult, raw painting, not at all sentimental picture of a baby, but a kind of very real painting of a baby, infant with mother's hand, 1903. And she also wrote of her ambition to take part in the Salon des Indépendants, the spring salon of artists' salon in Paris, the following year, because she felt she hadn't got anything ready to put in that year. And she expressed new feelings of confidence and excitement about what she was about to do, leaving her husband. I feel, she wrote, as though I have been given the gift of a new life that promises to become beautiful and abundant. I feel, too, that if there is anything lodged inside of me, it ought to be redeemed. And then, when it came to signing her letter to her poet friend, to Rilke, she wrote, "And now I am at a loss as to how to sign this letter. I am not Modersohn, and I am also no longer Paula Becker. I am me, and hope to become ever more so." That is probably the final goal of all our efforts. As we think about these words, these very moving words by a woman at the beginning of the 20th century who has struggled out of her marriage to establish herself as an artist, I want you to look at the self-portrait on her 6th wedding day of 1906. This is often considered the first nude and pregnant self-portrait by a woman artist, but it doesn't actually represent a real physical pregnancy. Paula painted it after she left her husband and fled to Paris, some 10 months before she actually conceived a child. Rather, I think it is a painting, a symbolic painting, about her potential, her fecundity, both as a woman and as an artist. Rilke's conviction that the artist had to be ready to make sacrifices in life to achieve great work may have influenced Paula Modersohn-Becker's decision to leave her husband. Rilke encouraged her to dedicate herself entirely to her artistic destiny. Once she had established herself in Paris with the help of a loan from Rilke, something of the warmth and openness of their original friendship returned. The poet introduced Modersohn-Becker to his circle, which included the feminist writer Ellen Key and the Norwegian writer couple Johan and Ellen Boger, with whom she forged an independent friendship. Rilke was employed as Auguste Rodin's secretary when Modersohn-Becker arrived in Paris in February 1906. But after he was dismissed in May for an incident that I haven't really got time to go into, but he fell out with Rodin. He was acting as his secretary, and Rodin felt he'd overstepped the mark in one way and another. And after he was dismissed, Paula Modersohn-Becker and Rainer Maria Rilke often spent time together. They ate vegetarian meals at his favorite restaurant and enjoyed outings to the Parc de Saint-Cloud and to Chantilly. When the Rilke-Westoff couple left the summer heat of Paris for the Belgian coast in July, Modersohn-Becker considered joining them, although Rilke actually discouraged her and recommended Brittany. Typically, in a way, he pulls people towards him and he pushes them away. It's just his way of trying to sort of negotiate relationships. And when the poet arrived at the Villa Discopoli in Capri the following winter, he wrote to his artist friend about the colors of the southern landscape and sent her reproductions of Pompeian paintings that reinforced her passionate interest in ancient art. This period of renewed friendship was unusually fertile and productive for both. After separating from Rodin, Rilke focused on writing new poems in preparation for the publication of his expanded edition of the Book of Images, which I'm showing you on your left. And in the summer months, a flood of new work appeared that made its way into his new poems, 1907, on your right. Modersohn-Becker, meanwhile, struggled with financial difficulties and continuing pressure from her husband and family to return to married life. But she stood firm, and many of her most exciting, groundbreaking works were created within this time frame, including her paintings of mothers and children, like the very beautiful Reclining Mother and Child, 1906 on your left, Kneeling Mother with Child at her breast, 1906 on your right, and her magnificent still lifes and figure paintings. I'm showing you Still Life with Pumpkin, 1905 on your left, and A Nude Girl with Flower Vases, 1906-7 on your right. And this is such an exciting time, really, because in a way, the objects in the still lives become almost like people. They're kind of bursting forth with a kind of fecundity. And the figures in the paintings cross over with still lives. I think one of the reasons that she was so free and able to have this kind of revolutionary spirit, she didn't really respect artistic genres, separate things. She crossed over barriers and boundaries. She leapt forward during these months. Is because, she was free. All the time, Otto was still sending her some money to live on. She wasn't exhibiting, and she wasn't selling work at this time. And so everything that she did in the studio had the freedom to be a kind of experiment. During this period of self-discovery for both poet and painter, self-portraiture played a vital role. Several of Modersohn-Becker's compelling self-portraits depict her resting her hand on her chin, creating the effect of what is often called a mock beard that is associated with the ceremonial beards of Egyptian pharaoh sculptures in the Louvre, which we know she greatly admired. I'm showing you a statue of Ramesses II from the Louvre, and her, there are two self-portraits here, self-portrait in blue and white striped dress on your left, and self-portrait looking left with hand on chin on your right, both 1906. And you can see the way she's holding her hand gives this sort of effect, almost like she has a beard on her chin. A more explicit version of this pharaoh's beard features in her intimate portrait of Rilke, along with his semi-open bard's mouth and clouded yet observant eyes. Their respective kingly beards hint at underlying affinities, and in a way, I think, place the poet and artist on an equal footing. I'm showing you again, of course, her portrait of Rilke from 1906 and a photo of him at the time. And then the Egyptian sculpture again. With her move to Paris, Paula Modersohn-Becker had assumed control over her own life. Although the issue was complicated by her continuing need for Modersohn's financial support, her break with her husband meant that she no longer had anyone ruling over her. Going forward, or so she believed, she would be her own king. And this affirmation of equality, in a way symbolized by the pharaoh's beard, the king's beard, was a factor in the relationship between poet and artist that distinguished it from many of Rilke's other bonds with women. Usually, he played the dominant role, although it was the women who stood up to him. Lou Andreas Salome, his first lover, who was a writer, an extremely interesting woman, who was described by Friedrich Nietzsche as the most intelligent woman he'd ever met, which, coming from Nietzsche, is probably quite something. And Modersohn-Becker, and eventually Clara Westoff. And it was these women whose friendship he valued most, who stood up to him, who didn't allow him to trample over them. Despite their differences, there were important affinities between Rilke's and Modersohn's worldviews, to which she may be alluding in these companion portraits. Both were deeply committed to nature as a life force, and almost as an alternative religion. And both were passionately involved with the other's means of expression. An important theme of their conversations was the books they shared and discussed. Rilke, in his turn, was fundamentally shaped by his transformative encounters with works of art. His experiences of Rodin and Cezanne, both of whom Modersohn-Becker greatly admired, were crucial. But he was also profoundly affected by Westoff and Modersohn-Becker, who, he acknowledged, taught him to see things to which he had previously been blind. How much I am learning through the gaze of those two girls, he wrote when he first met them in 1900, especially the blonde painter who has such brown and watchful eyes. I'm coming to the end. I'm sorry, it's run a little bit over. The two of them again in their companion portraits. It was Cezanne, above all, that bound the work of poet and artist together. When Modersohn-Becker discovered Cezanne with Clara Westoff during the girl's first visit to Paris in 1900, he affected her, I quote, like a thunderstorm, like some great event. And in 1907, a major Cezanne retrospective was staged at the Salon d'Automne, the autumn salon in Paris, which Rilke visited and revisited obsessively. This gave rise to the poet's probing, transformative descriptions of Cezanne's paintings in his Letters on Cezanne, which, although they were addressed to Clara, may well have been written with Modersohn-Becker in mind. Rilke's relentless attempts, and I would really recommend you to read this book. It is translated into English, and they're the most beautiful descriptions of Cezanne's work. And he relentlessly attempts to capture the essence of Cezanne's vision, to define his perfectly pitched gaze. For both Rilke and Modersohn-Becker, Cezanne was the artist who best achieved the magical distillation of life into art, maintaining a rare and perfect balance between the two. Sadly, Modersohn-Becker never saw the Cezanne retrospective. I'm showing you, though, these tabletop still lives that she does, of which there's some examples in the exhibition. This is still life with yellow bowl and clay pot in the center. Rilke's Letters on Cezanne in a later edition on your left, and Cezanne's still life with commode, 1887 to 1888. I think here again, just like that landscape, the landscapes I showed you in relation to her husband, what really is noticeable here is the way that she goes right in subjectively, intimately on her subject, rather than having a kind of objective overview in the way that Cezanne does in his comparable still life. But it nevertheless obviously shows the influence of Cezanne on her. But sadly, she didn't see the 1907 retrospective because, faced with the unavoidable reality that she could not support herself, in September 1906, she returned to her husband. They spent the winter in Paris and then they went back to Worpswede. And by this time, she really was pregnant. She was pregnant when they got back together in Paris. She became pregnant and she went back to Worpswede to prepare for the birth of her daughter. And late in the pregnancy, in October, Clara visited Modersohn-Becker in the final stages of her pregnancy and read to her Rilke's letters on Cezanne, which he had addressed to Clara. And although the artist had previously expressed reservations about Rilke's writings, at this particular juncture, she acknowledges how impressive she finds his writing and says that, the boy is becoming a man. I'm going to jump a little bit because I want to leave time for your questions. Unfortunately, while she was still confined to bed following the difficult birth of her daughter Matilda on All Saints' Day, the 2nd of November 1907, the artist's while she was still confined to bed, the artist's husband, mother, and brother discovered her most recent work in her studio, and I'm showing you 2 examples here. Old Poorhouse Women in the Garden with Glass Ball and Poppies, 1907, and Still Life with Sunflowers, Hollyhocks, and Daisies. Even her own family were overwhelmed at this stage by her achievement. Even Otto didn't know the quality of the work that she was making back in Worpswede during these last few months of her life. And her mother writes at that point that the intensity of the painting's glowing colours made everything else seem dead. 10 days later, when Modersohn-Becker attempted to get up for the first time after her daughter was born, she died of an embolism. She was just 31 years old. Exactly 1 year after her death, Rilke wrote the poem Requiem to his friend's memory, which is both a celebration of the artist and a bitter lament. Whereas Cezanne's perfectly pitched balance between life and art assured him a place in the pantheon of the gods, Modersohn-Becker is condemned to wander the earth in Rilke's poem as a restless ghost. Dying in childbirth, in the poet's opinion, amounted to being dragged back from the realm of art to the realm of life, a fate that was sealed when she abandoned her solitary dedication to her artistic destiny in Paris and returned to her married life. Rilke honors his remarkable friend, I quote, who surpassed all other women in transformation, and who passed through life, he wrote, open to all things, like a breaking day. But he interprets her ghostly visits from the realm of the dead as a warning that any artist can fall prey to the ancient enmity between life and the great work. I'm showing you here, as you can see, a photograph of Modersohn-Becker with her baby daughter, and in the central painting, her last self-portrait, where she rests one hand on her pregnant stomach and she holds 2 flowers up, this time in her hand. 2 flowers, one, I think, representing her creativity as an artist, and the other, her creativity as a woman, as a mother. Rilke believed that Modersohn-Becker had sacrificed her art to motherhood. But had she been able to reply This would in all probability have sparked another conflict between poet and painter. For Modersohn-Becker celebrated motherhood in her remarkable paintings as a vital aspect of womankind's dual potency and creativity. This is symbolized in this last self-portrait with 2 flowers, which she holds in one hand. To be both a mother and an artist, in her view, was the highest possible achievement and a fulfillment of her destiny. Okay, thank you.